This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is an inspiring leader whose primary goal is to, 1, educate small business owners about how the law impacts their businesses and how they can impact the legal process, and 2, raise women's awareness of how to gain greater impact and power through financial education and growth. Her law firm, Gill Family Law, handles complex case matters, including families having mental health and/or addiction issues, families owning businesses, and families wanting to protect their assets for generations. She is a small business owner and was a small business owner prior to becoming an attorney. Her experience as a small business owner helped her better represent business owners. Her consulting firm, Gray Gill Consulting, educates business owners on how the law impacts their business. Through Gray Gill Consulting, she helps executive-minded entrepreneurial women re-enter the workforce by re-establishing their professional network through creating forums and networks for them to connect, gain support, and flourish. Her personal experience working with a lawyer when she went through a tax audit on her own business, as well as working with the legal system through her divorce, inspired her to get into the industry. She's a passionate advocate for improving the experience of domestic violence survivors and for improving the experience of all families in the court system. Her firm is a safe haven, allowing clients to heal mentally while guiding them through life-changing legal matters and ensuring every detail of the process is finely tuned, including the redesign of her law office, which exudes a refreshed day spa ambiance. She's married and has an adult son, and in her free time, she loves a great challenge that expands her knowledge. And she likes golf, too. Please welcome the founder of Gill Family Law, Lisa Gill. Welcome,
Good
Lisa.
morning. I'm laughing because of likes golf. Golf is a challenge, but do we really like it? I feel like it's something that you try to master and never do. It's just like a lifelong challenge.
Yeah, but you talk a lot about that, about in what some of the things I've read about you, in that it really is about the challenge. And it's interesting in reading your bio that was actually curated and sent to me, and I kind of manipulated a little bit, but saw the loves to learn more and gain knowledge. Everything I've read about you is really about this desire to learn more and improve more and constant learner. And yeah. I love that that's like how you started with golf. It's like do I like golf?
It presents a challenge every day. I think anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur, first of all, needs to be somebody who is that they thrive off of that. They thrive off of something presenting a challenge every day. They realize that is life. I mean, to me, that is the real spice, the real flow and blood stream of life, is waking up and realizing everything is going to create. There's going to be new challenges every day, and feeling like mentally, all I do is I prepare myself for the challenges of each day, rather than thinking, "Oh, what's going to happen to me today?" Right? It's just a mindset shift. It's just a very small millimeter, mindset shift, but it changes everything about how you experience life. And if somebody already has that, I think that's a good baseline. If they don't have it, I think they want to develop it, because you'll also have to continue to develop it as you are doing whatever your entrepreneurial pursuit is. You'll have to keep reframing. You'll have to, the biggest thing that and I've learned that from, setbacks and failures. The biggest thing that I see, though, and you hear people say it almost to the point where it becomes cliche, but it's true. And it's just that you have to believe like Simon Sinek says, you have to believe starting with the why, you have to believe the why has meaning. And that will allow you to reset every day and figure out, okay, the why I am doing this has meaning. So even if the way I did it yesterday didn't produce the result I was looking for, I'm just going to figure out how to make small shifts until I get there, because that's what separates, I think, the people that ultimately succeed from the people that don't. If you experience setbacks, and I've also experienced setbacks and quit, you know what I mean? I've had those moments where it's like, this just isn't for me. I need to figure out something else, especially in law. Anybody who pursues this as a career will tell you that it will break you. It's not the only career that will break somebody. But just like it helps, I think, a lot, because if you don't get broken in that, you realize, oh, what else could I do? Okay, because I thought maybe I couldn't do this. Now I am doing it. What else could I do outside of just, realizing I might be able to master being an attorney? It builds a resilience inside of you that really has helped me, based on something you were talking about in the intro. The very first experience I had as a small business owner, I did experience a tax audit. I sold that business with my spouse. We thought at the time, wow, we've really done something. We were 20-year-olds and we'd started a business, we'd marketed a business, we sold a business. And the audit that occurred after the sale taught us a lot of things, but at the same time, it made us feel like, well, maybe we shouldn't be business owners because we don't really know enough about business. And speaking from a lawyer's perspective, I think the truth is you shouldn't shift that far, because nobody would start a business. It's kind of like having a baby. Nobody would enter into those endeavors, and if they really, really knew everything that it takes and all the possibilities of things that could go wrong, in entering that endeavor, that does not mean those are not worthwhile things, and they are not the things that enrich, our lives, expand our level of experience of the human condition, really. Owning your own business, I think, and overcoming things like what I was talking about, when you overcome something like a business audit, and we ended up not owing any additional tax. It was determined that we didn't, which that was a relief, because you also feel like you've been accused of a crime, or, you've been accused of doing something wrong. And you were relying most of the time on other professionals too, when you're talking about something like that in business. So then you question the other individuals that, may have been tax preparers or doing accounting and bookkeeping for you. But what it really taught me was that things happen, and you have to pivot to figure out how to manage what is, and not wish for what you thought something was or could be. You have to manage what really is in the moment. And that, to me, is really the only thing you need to really understand to be an entrepreneur in anything. So experiences like that also teach you, I'm not limited. I don't have to stick with just things I already know. If there's something I feel like I'm passionate about, because at the time I was not a lawyer, and I had thought about going to law school, and I had, talked myself out of that for various reasons. I don't come from a family that has a lot of money. I have no lawyers in my family. I'm a first gen college graduate, so obviously first generation. Nobody's went through college. They haven't gone through law school. And so going through the audit process was really one of the first major exposures I had as far as what is being represented by a lawyer in business look like. And what does a lawyer do, so to speak, other than what you see on a John Grisham movie, somebody being in a trial in front of a jury. Okay, lawyers do a lot of things and offer guidance in a lot of areas. And so that tax audit really taught me the relationship with lawyers is one that you should try to start uh, early in a buy sell situation, not later, even if it's a tax lawyer, which you may think, well, I did have a lawyer. I had somebody who was closing the buy sell on a business, but I didn't have necessarily a tax lawyer giving me advice because I learned a lot of things. For instance, a lot of times certain things that are happening in a buy sell situation might flag you for an audit. And so you should really be asking a tax lawyer how to handle certain things that would be bought and sold as part of the business transaction when you're selling a business to make sure you're navigating that carefully. Trying to think of anything else, but I mean, really just also the coming out on the other side and realizing, okay, we didn't do anything wrong. We don't owe any additional money. We are very grateful for the lawyer, but he was quite expensive and probably would have been less expensive had we consulted with him in the buy sell transaction rather than only engaging a tax lawyer during, once the audit was already in process. So that taught me a lot about, navigating situations. And, we always think, if I can at all as a business owner, I just want to use lawyers minimally because they're so expensive, right? So that's true. But really using somebody that's transactional and having them give you some guidance or write what's called an opinion letter early on is very beneficial and can help you navigate things. And it's not always as expensive as we think. It actually can save money and heartache on the end of transactions. When I first started practicing, I did not practice in family law. My dad was a contractor, and I ended up getting into real estate and construction, which I enjoyed and kind of knew a little bit about from my dad. He had started out as a cost estimator, doing cost estimation on projects, and then was a contractor. And so I'd helped him a little bit and I understood that. I liked that practically. But one thing I really learned through that is that a lot of the litigation that happens even in, projects like construction projects, it happens where there is a breakdown in trust and communication and someone sues rather than trying to navigate their way, through with the other parties involved. And eventually parties usually get back to the table and there's what's called a mediation and that gets resolved. But a lot of it could have been resolved just if people were more transparent and weren't afraid. And, kind of even with lawyers, I watched that too with the lawyer I worked for and the way different lawyers, their tactics or their persona, how that actually negatively impacted clients sometimes, negatively impacted their clients because it actually raised aggression and raised hostility and raised distrust between the parties that were already involved. And so, I know how attorneys can get that way, and they may use certain tactics, and they actually think ultimately this is going to produce a positive result. Trust me, because they're going to be, the other attorneys in the conflict are going to be concerned about me or us or, and because they're nervous and scared, they'll want to resolve the conflict. That doesn't always work. And I'm not saying it never works, but everybody's got their own ego and personality. So when one person's attorney starts doing that, it usually triggers that in other people's attorneys and makes it harder for you then to, unless they know they're doing it and they are consciously aware that they are doing it and telling the person, look, this is just a thing I'm doing. Don't worry about it. But if that's really just their own ego speaking up because somebody raised hostility first, in my experience, that makes it harder for everybody to get to neutral again, because then even if there's a reasonable headed attorney saying, look, I hear what was said, but let me help you understand how I think this really plays out if there was a hearing, and let's try to get back to the table on a negotiation. Sometimes people can't do that. And they just mentally cannot do it because they feel victimized by what's happening. And they feel like if they go back to the table, they are bowing down to somebody who has just raised aggression. And so, I mean, it's just like a natural one thing I wanted to do in practice, in having observed that as a young lawyer, and especially once I got into family law, because then you're talking about a whole different dynamic. And I had experienced a divorce before I went to law school, was to try to be as holistic as possible, not to be somebody who cannot meet conflict or answer raised hostility if it has to be answered for, but certainly not to be the person who costs my client money or trauma. I mean, it's a traumatic experience, whether you're in a family law situation or any situation. Nobody wants to be sued. Even people who have large reserves, when we think about true titans of industry, and they know that litigation is the cost of doing business, and they have true reserves, for that, they would be lying if they said they want to be sued, right? They know that it's a possibility, and they know that if they push hard in their industry, in certain areas, there's possibilities they'll be sued. There's possibilities that regulation will impact them, which is something that happened in the industry I was in, which was hospitality. We had something in Tennessee that got passed called the sin tax, and it was just called that in the media, as in sins, because it sought to tax more heavily alcohol, tobacco, and products with sugar as the within the first three ingredients. So some of the collateral damage of that, though, was that, for instance, somebody we met, because we met other people after we were going through this audit who had experienced different things in business as a result of the sin tax. But that was in hindsight. That was after we were in the audit, not before. We didn't have the 10,000 foot view that business owners really need to have about regulation impacting their industry at the time. So we met, for instance, one man, he was blind, and he owned some a vending company. They had vending machines throughout different schools and hospitals, and that was a small family-owned business that he had taken over for his parents. And so he was negatively impacted by the sin tax. And I think those are the people that when somebody is a proponent of certain legislation, they're labeling it the sin tax to try to, make it an attractive vote, right? We want to heavily tax these things. These are bad things. They're not thinking about those individual small business owners or small business owners like us. So it's really important that small business owners don't just rely on trade organizations. Like, for instance, hospitality organizations, they were speaking to the General Assembly, but you have to really, in my opinion, develop the stories of the individual small business owners who will be impacted. They're not huge titans of industry. They don't necessarily have somebody who's just watching legislation. They don't have their own lobbyists. They don't have that kind of operation going. And it's important to tell their stories. That's why it's so important for me that small business owners really understand what is happening in their General Assembly, what type of what's happening at their local government, and how that is possibly going to impact their business so that they can act early, and they can organize, and they can join trade organizations that might already have a voice and a lobbyist, so they give more voice to getting the right piece of legislation passed, making sure it takes into consideration certain things so that they aren't negatively impacted. They have at least an awareness of what business practices they might need to change if the legislation is going to get passed anyway. A good example is, if you're watching now, is we have the Sherman Antitrust Act has been a little bit dormant for many years. And it really, people relate it to when we were breaking up huge monopolies, and you're thinking about, years and years ago, Vanderbilt time. Now you're seeing it kind of revived, and it appears to me, and this is just speculative in reading, that it may be aimed at breaking up tech companies, right? They are growing like we saw mass titans grow back in the day without regulation that might be able to prevent that. I'm not saying we want to prevent it, but I'm saying you see a lot of, for instance, you've seen a lot of anti-compete. There's a lot of concern also with your current regulatory boards regarding anti-compete. And so that's something, in my opinion, it impacts certain industries. One would be medical. Anybody who, well, I can just tell you, as a blanket rule, anybody who would be developing something that needs to be protected and is state of the art, it's cutting edge, it's new to the market, it's an emerging market item. So you typically think about tech, engineering, medical device. There's just certain industries that are going to be the most impacted by that kind of regulation. And the large ones definitely probably are already watching that, have their own lobbyists, and trying to figure out what kind of compliance issues would I have moving forward if I'm going to continue in this industry, and if this piece of legislation is passed just as is, or if things continue to be enforced or regulated as is. So you saw that recently in a crypto case where the SEC was trying to have crypto kind of defined in the way we would normally define stock, so that there would be a different type of regulatory authority expanded to that. And so there's nothing devious about that. It's just the law develops certain definitions when you have old legislation, like antitrust law. When you have old legislation, they develop those definitions through litigation, right? They bring cases to have the judges decide, does this fall within this category? Because what they are doing is so new and novel. When you're talking about crypto or you're talking about certain tech concepts, it's not clear if this old legal definition will actually encompass those things. So do you think it does? They're asking the judges, and then you get opinions like you get from the Supreme Court or circuit courts that start to create those definitions through the case law. And later those definitions may get codified. So my other thing that I'm very passionate about is you really have to understand people have an awareness of it's important with our Supreme Court, or it's important maybe with a federal court judge being appointed, but you really need to have an awareness of who is being voted in and into your local judicial elections, because those judges usually have a trajectory where they eventually will end up on your state appellate courts. And so for your industry, depending on what it is, if it's state regulatory, they may end up making the decisions I'm talking about. Does this thing fall within these old definitions? And so you really want to pay attention to those. And it's very well known that people do not typically pay very close attention to local judicial elections for a lot of reasons. They don't know the candidates, and these are usually not partisan. They're bipartisan in Tennessee, so they're not able to vote based on, okay, I could just see a party designation that I align with. So really it would force them to do a lot of research on their own that they might not be comfortable doing, or it might require them to go to a lot of, little League of Women Voters or local, forums. They may not have the time to do that as business owners. So it really is important that information be gathered in some kind of universally accessible way where people can get information about local candidates in the same way they would if they were, their city council person. Because your local judges do have a lot of power over you. They will decide business disputes. If you have a contract dispute, those will be the judges that would preside over those cases. And like I said, ultimately they have a trajectory where they will end up, not all of them, but the top percentage performers usually will end up on your appellate courts. And when they do, those decisions may later become codified law through your General Assembly. So you really want to understand all the way around 360 view who's in control of my life, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about when we're business owners. Whoever controls the regulation that impacts our businesses controls our universe. So those things are important, not just on the national level. That's just something I'm very passionate that business owners know, because it makes a huge difference, and it makes a huge difference about your ability to pivot and think about your long-term course. Just think about if you're a business owner and you don't really understand banking, or you've never lived through a recession. So if you have, you kind of, and there's old ways, meaning there might be a million articles, and I'm sure there are now. I read lots of things that every business owner reads, right? I read Forbes, I read Inc., I read Harvard Business Review, all this stuff. And you'll always see the same type of articles, the recession coming, here's the things that business owners need to be aware of, like retooling the personnel you already have, filling out where there might be skills gaps and getting them training, because you might not have the money to just add new talent, depending on what happens with cash reserves and, everything. And how much is it going to cost to borrow money, right? Lines of credit. So you're having to think about all of these things. So you have a little guidepost list that is in existence that is tried and true. But if you really understand other things on the horizon with regulation and industry, you can make the best, most informed decision. An example would be, another example, I think, that I'm passionate about, and a lot of that has to do with my dad. My dad always, because his business was, construction projects. So always he's reading immediately. He always read 3 different newspapers, because he, even that long ago, thought you really shouldn't get your news from one source, and everybody can have their opinion about that, but I still agree with that. He would always read everything that had to do with city planning, everything that had to do, if he looked at anything that had to do with stock, it would usually be cost of materials related. So those are things that he always, thought about. And he really told me, people who don't pay attention to city planning don't really have a right to complain. And I really understand what he meant. And he meant there's so many things that the city can earmark money for, but if you're not paying attention to what they are earmarking money on projects, then hindsight, it's hard for you to complain. I mean, he was a big person as far as using your voice, voting, doing all those things, being proactive. And to me, that all goes together, because if you really understand what's coming in city planning and commercial construction projects, you can really understand a lot about what the future may hold for your business in different ways. And you can also impact those projects too, whether it involves, I'm trying to think of some specific examples, but one that comes to mind is just, if you're in an area that needs more foot traffic, and there are people who it would benefit your business. You're already pre-existing small business, which is already paying taxes to the municipality, right? So you're there and you're thinking, whether it's sales tax or you own your building, you're paying taxes to that municipality. So you're thinking, I need more foot traffic. It'd be really great if there was actually a little bit more commercial, space around here, so people have other things that they're coming to, whether it's restaurants or whatever. And then you realize there's a possibility there could be one, and there is a developer who is trying to develop that, but the other residential people around your business are against it. You need to get involved in that conversation, right? Because you need the foot traffic. You're a pre-existing business. People need to realize, I may have to move my business if you don't let this. I'm not gonna just say whatever he's doing is fine. Let's talk about it. But if he doesn't bring something in, you may end up with blight, because me and other small business owners right in the little space where we are, if we don't get what we need as far as more foot traffic and lifeblood, we're going to leave. So I think you need to hear him out and see if there's some kind of compromise, because there's a lot of compromise in a lot of city planning projects too. it goes before the council. They want to hear from people like what I'm talking about, small business owners, and they want to hear why it's good, why it's not good, and from residents. And so generally the person too who can bring in the most information, I feel like gets the ear of all present. Somebody who's really thought through the things I'm talking about. And so the other objective we have is to help small business owners either, they may want us to help them represent themselves in front of city council, but also just help them prepare. And in talking to other small business owners, this is kind of how this came about. And talking to other small business owners, for a long time, I'd never talked about the audit because that's kind of like a mark of shame in business owners. If people hear that you've gone through an audit, they think, oh, why? In more recent years, I have realized how critical. There were people who knew about it though, and they would send people to me and they would say, I know somebody who also is going through an audit, and they just want somebody to talk to, because it's so overwhelming. You are going through all of your receipts and all of your things with your bookkeeper and CPA, and you're usually doing it on a very constant basis. It becomes like a second job. And that's true for a lot of people in any litigation. And so they would just send people to me and say, they're going through this. I just want them to be able to talk to you because I want them to know, it's not the end of the world. And you can kind of tell them things that you did to help process and, relax your mind or whatever. And really the number one thing is have a good lawyer, because he put us at ease, even though I was so young and really didn't understand exactly what was happening. I felt comfortable, and he never talked down to us either. That was a big key factor in that, which I think is another stereotype of my profession, but one that I hope the profession would take seriously and try to, rid the general population of that stereotype, because of the fact that I think lawyers can be advisors and very helpful. So getting back to what I was saying though, they would send people to me. I would just start talking to people. And then I just started also having people come to me that were talking to me about things that were going before city council or other things. And they were kind of just asking me to help them prepare, because they're not lawyers. They own hair salons, they own restaurants, they own lots of small businesses, but they are not in the habit of public speaking, and they're not in the habit of advocating in that way. So they would come to me and say, here's what's going on. Here's the regulation, and whatever's being proposed. Can you kind of map out some points, for me to take in front of city council? And I would say, sure, I don't have a problem doing that. I would love to do it. So that is kind of what spurred me thinking this could be actually more widespread, meaning not just me sitting with people or meeting with people in other trade organizations to discuss this, but it could be more widespread where I could be giving this information to a broader base of people. I think it's useful information, and I really think every business owner needs to know it. And the only reason I paused when I started to say that is because I wouldn't want new business owners to be completely overwhelmed. Like I said, I just want that to be a resource that is there for people, where they would be able to access that information and get a better understanding and decide how they want to get involved. And if they know it's impacting them, really have a guide, a roadmap as to, okay, I know I want to get involved. What are the steps? Really understanding how do things get passed in your local, your state legislature? How do I impact that process?
This was like a workshop for everyone listening here. I mean, myself included. This was like a workshop. I'm sitting here. I got 3 pages of notes in front of me now, and I'm going, all right, where do I start? There was just so much information that you just shared, and so thoughtfully with examples and ideas. And I just kind of want to kind of just break it down a little bit for everybody in what we just got there. So many different situations, and one of them, you being a business owner and going through an experience that is not unique to just you. And I think removing the shame and the judgment from it is so important for our entrepreneurs, business owners, business leaders, community leaders to hear, is that there's no shame in the things that happen throughout the course of business or the non-for-profit work that you're doing or anything. And once you own it, it's empowering is what I picked up from you. Another thing that's so important in what you just said there is about realizing your industry and the regulations that affect your industry. I think I go back to when you're making those choices of choosing what industry to go into, to think about that. Think about like, what is it, that I'm selling here? What kind of product? And does it meet my moral codes, my integral codes? Because for me, for instance, tobacco or alcohol probably wouldn't go into my codes. Not that I'm against them wholeheartedly, but just in the sense of, getting into the wrong hands of the wrong people or abuse of those substances. It's not something I'd want to be attached to. So I wouldn't get into an industry like that. I love that you bring up Simon Sinek and learning your purpose and your why. I do workshops for public speaking and for communication and helping leaders really step into their own. And the one thing I always go back to is your purpose. Because to your point, like when you know what you're fighting for, when you know your purpose, it makes everything, I won't say easier, I was about to. It doesn't make it easier, but at least you know why, you have purpose. I'll give a simple example in that. For years, I had been toying with the idea of skydiving. I enjoy adventure sports, skiing, whitewater rafting. And so it was like, okay, skydiving is probably going to be a part of that, right? And I had the opportunity to interview someone on my podcast here who has a helicopter and a flying helicopter company and a flying school. And she flies out for skydiving. She's like, Michael, you should come. And so I was like, whoa, okay, now I have this opportunity. What am I going to do with it? And I realized, my purpose in adventure sports is because I really love the ones that I'm involved in, and I have an affinity to them because of how I grew up. My father took us skiing as kids. My father took us on family trips, whitewater rafting. And so there's a heart attachment to it. There's a purpose behind it. And so if I get hurt skiing, which I did, I actually fractured my shoulder here and don't even have a shoulder muscle because of it any longer. It doesn't affect me as badly as if I went skydiving just because it's another adventure sport that I got to check off my list and then I break my leg.
Yeah.
I would be so upset that I did something just to check it off a box versus, no, I love skiing. I'm passionate about it. I was practicing for the ski team and I got hurt. Okay, I could live with that because it was living within my purpose. So I love that you bring that up. And another thing that I want to touch on with going back to regulation for you, and I love that you brought this up about voting locally, and I certainly am guilty of not voting locally, but there's an example. So you're in Tennessee, and I'm in the Hudson Valley, New York, and I'm sure you have countless examples where you are and in your area, but we have one locally, a perfect example of this that I've witnessed through my years in the business community, of Mark Molinaro. And for a lot of people who are listening in the Hudson Valley region, they know who I'm talking about. He was the youngest mayor ever voted in the town of, I believe it was Red Hook, which is a town in New York in the Hudson Valley. He was 19 years old when he was voted in as mayor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, incredible, right? But these are small towns, right? And local politics, right? So he gets voted in at 19 years old. He then rises up, becomes a state senator. I believe state senator. I might be wrong. I know he got into the Senate, right? Then becomes the county executive for Dutchess County, which is one of the bigger counties in our region. And then goes into Congress and is now running, was running for governor, for state governor. And I believe he'll probably go for another run of it, from what I understand. I don't know much about politics. But what I'll say is I've witnessed him, I've met him, I've witnessed him go through these different levels and realized, wow, how much local government plays a role, because if you voted for him as mayor, you helped him on that trajectory. Now, he's a great guy, which is good. I said, I don't really follow politics, so I don't really know everything he stands for or doesn't stand for. I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about him as a person because that's how I've met him in different settings. So he's a really good guy, and I'm very happy for him and his family. But this guy rose up through, like you said, mayor, county executive, Congress, and is going for governor. And then, from governor, he's still a young guy. He's only in his, I want to say late 40s, early 50s, maybe. And, why wouldn't something larger than governor and president, come about? And so it all starts at the local level. So I love that you bring that up. I'm going to bring us back out of all of that for a second here, because I know that we have a lot more to cover in terms of all of that, and I know you can dig deeper in all of those things. I just wanted to highlight all of those. I want to go back a second here because I forget if it was a video that I watched on you or I read about it, but there's something interesting that happened in your life, which is you mentioned here that you're the first college graduate. And you started a business, but you always knew you wanted law, but then you didn't go pursue law, and then you pursued law later in life.
Yeah.
And this brings up one of the things I always talk about in my seminars as well, which is the imposter syndrome and this, I'm not deserving of this quite yet. And we could imagine that because of you being the first college graduate. And I actually am looking for you to kind of go into that with me. And the reason why I bring this up is because it was you spoke about this, was you knew you wanted to be a lawyer since you were 9 years old.
Yeah.
And so why didn't you go for it? And, I'm going to turn this back to you in terms of that and kind of just addressing that.
Yeah. So a lot of different reasons. I think the biggest one being I didn't come from a family that didn't encourage that, but there wasn't that whole, if you can see it, you can be it.
Right.
I mean, I really do think that's true.
Yes.
And I really didn't, I didn't have that baseline. So I didn't, like I said before, I didn't have anyone in my family who'd ever done it. And then while I was in college, got pregnant with my son and actually finished after he was born. So then it also felt like it's just too much. You can't do that. You've got to just figure out what are your other options. And so I kind of did that, kind of figured that out, got married. My husband and I started a business. And then really though, going through that process of the audit really galvanized me to think, okay, it is hard, but so was going through this audit, right? And you just did that. And that was much harder than it was a harder thing than you thought you could survive or get through. You got through it. The getting through of a thing like that just teaches you, it's just every day is a day at a time. And that is just life. And there are phases and periods of your life that are like that. They cannot be avoided. You cannot avoid them, even if you don't choose to be an entrepreneur. You cannot avoid them, even if you don't choose to go to law school. You cannot avoid them, just by trying to make what you think is an easier choice. They are coming. They are part of life. And you get to choose if the hard things are things you choose to do sometimes, or if they are something you did not choose for yourself. But you don't get to choose a life where they don't exist. So realizing that was adult reality made me think, okay, fine, law school then, right? I can do that. If hard things just come, and that's part of this, being a grown up and navigating your own way, then I'm going to choose a hard thing for myself, something I want. And when my son went to kindergarten, I started law school. I made a plan to apply and do all the things. And so I waited until he started kindergarten. That's when I went to law school.
Wow. Yeah. I love this idea that you're talking about. And because I was just talking about this with my coach in terms of like things happening for you. And living into the good things happening for you. So when I get a speaking gig, or the opportunity of this podcast when this came about 3 years ago, it's like you just live into that moment. You don't even think about it. You're just like, this is awesome. This is happening for me. All the great work that I've put into it. This is happening for me. This is wonderful, right? And then when the bad things happen, we forget that everything's happening for us. And it's hard to emotionally attach to it. And that's what I was just telling my coach recently, Merritt, who I always love to give a shout out to, Merritt Minnemeyer. She's awesome. Is, I tend to put it in the bucket. I go, I'm self-aware in that I'm like, okay, this is happening for me. And then I'm like, I'm going to put it in that bucket. And then I look at this and I go, but why? Why is this happening for me? Or how is this happening for me? Right. And what she was sharing with me was exactly what you're just talking about here, is that like, the good and the bad are going to happen. And I love how you say this about how you get to choose, though, how it happens. And so for you, you're like, you know what? If good and bad are going to happen, then I'm going to make a decision and become a lawyer and make it really hard. And forget about bad. I'm talking about hard, like you said, if life's going to be hard.
Yeah.
I go back to the Simon Sinek that you mentioned about purpose and finding your purpose. What was that like for you? Obviously, you had this experience of going through the audit, and it's really hard. And I'm also interested in breaking down what hard means, right? Because there's so many different aspects or elements to hard. Was it hard with the tasks list in front of you? Was it hard emotionally? I'm sure both. But I'm interested in that too, of what hard means. But there you are, right? Really living through all of this and finding your purpose. And I'm so interested in that search and how you were able to really attach and reconnect to that 9-year-old girl.
Yeah. So having the relationship with our lawyer as a guide and feeling really confident in him, and then just feeling like I would want to do that. I think there is something in my purpose that I would want to help guide people through things that were difficult, and really that involved the legal system. And that was what made me want to do it. I mean, it's funny, and I used to be embarrassed to say it in interviews until I realized so many different people that were lawyers that would be interviewing you for jobs also would say, oh yeah, that's why I wanted to go to law school. But watching Perry Mason as a child was one of the reasons that I was thinking, I want to be this person, because it's always somebody who's been falsely accused and all the odds are stacked against him. It looks like it's a slam dunk that they are guilty. And he puts all the pieces of this puzzle together that shows no, that was the easy solution to say they were guilty. It was not true. And things like murder, which most of his cases involved, is more complex than that. There are some complexities, and more than that, if you're going to take something away, a right, and in those cases it would be somebody's life, you should really put some time into, how you're coming up with your outcome. So it seems more dramatized when I talk about Perry Mason, because my actual life was not at stake. Right.
He also did it in 30 minutes.
Right. He did do it in 30 minutes. But the feeling like something huge or insurmountable is in front of you and somebody is guiding you through, and also that they're not sugarcoating it, but they are also giving you, reassurance about all the possibilities. And I know I hate using the word hard, mainly because I don't want people to feel like these are experiences to avoid. I don't want to do that. Hard, and that's kind of what the connotation of that word is. So like challenging, I feel like is better, because it was difficult. It was challenging. But like you said, when you asked, was it your task list or was it the emotional part? It's both. And the more you put yourself into these challenging situations and just honor fear as part of life, you really realize your fear is speaking to you louder than your reality. Meaning, do I want to do that again? No, right? I don't want to do it again. But if I had to do it again, I feel like I know how it would be handled, and also the things that I can do to help anybody who would have to assist me in that process, and then also the ways to avoid it in the first place. And I also know, like I said, to get certain advice on the front end before there would ever be buy-sell agreements on any business involving me. And that's something I didn't know before that process, or I didn't know it in depth as I know it now. And there's not a way to get a lot of a lot of things other than experience.
Mm.
And so a lot of the tools we need, we cannot get from reading about them, even if the article or checklist tells us exactly the same things. They cannot fully be understood or learned other than through experience.
Mm-hmm.
So those lessons are with me. They are a part of me now, and I won't forget them the way I would, an article I read. That's different. So I don't know if you've seen that interview, for instance, with, again, also they're talking about death. And I hate making comparisons like this because I don't want people to think I'm confused and thinking a tax audit is the same as the death of a relative or themselves. But the interview where Anderson Cooper interviews Stephen Colbert, and he talks about, I wish I could remember the exact quote, but he's basically saying, what are the challenges we face in life other than gifts? I mean, like you said, it's hard to see that in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It is. But the more you have moved past something like that, the more capable you are of seeing a current challenge as not a permanent state of being. And my grandmother and her sisters all lived through the Depression. And to this day, I've never met anyone other than those group of ladies, none of them are still living, that had just steel nerves. I mean, I've never met anyone who, no matter what came, they just were not collapsible.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand that. I really just thought that came with age, or, maybe that's just how grown-ups were. But of course, when you become a grown-up, you realize, well, I'm not really like that. And you realize other grown-ups are more fallible than that. And they weren't infallible. It's just, I never saw them get worked up about anything. They always believed everything was something they were going to be able to get through. And that was very clear in watching them in any type of family crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I am relating that, all those things together is through loss is part of our journey and setbacks is part of our journey. And they add layers of strength to us mentally. They make our hearts stronger. They make our resilience and our fortitude stronger. I mean, you cannot grow those things without the bucket of, how is this helping me? You can't do it without that bucket.
Yeah, you can't do it without the experience. You're right, because to your point, you could read it in an article, you can emotionally attach to it, you could empathize. All of these feelings can certainly come about. You can cry while reading it or watching it or listening to it. And so you're empathizing and you're feeling what that other person is going through. But to your point, you're not experiencing it yourself. And what I've learned, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, is that these experiences, while they're not unique in the business world of a tax audit and all the rest, they're unique in each situation. And it's unique to you on how it's happening and what the nuances are in the case and what's going on. And it also has to do with how you are participating in it all, and you're learning from that. I love how you break down the idea of challenge versus harder. I was interested while you were saying it. I was like, okay, where's she going with this? And again, it goes back to you and being a lifelong learner of, when you're always wanting to learn and always wanting to understand things better, it really is what a challenge is, right? That's what a challenge is. A challenge is saying, here's this really difficult thing and figure it out. And no one said it's going to be easy, but you got to try to figure it out if you want to continue. And That's the lifelong learner. Whereas to your point, hard is, here's this hard thing and it's really hard. And it's like, okay, now what? Okay, it's hard. So what else? What's next? Now we're playing with words here, and I totally get that, but I do like how you kind of break that down. What came to mind for me when you were talking a little bit about, I think, something along those lines, of when bad things happen or challenging things happen to us and how we get so attached to that moment. I think for me, and I go back to your holistic roots, and I'm interested in this and in your practice, is I've learned a tremendous amount about meditating and manifesting and spiritual guidance and the universe and all these other really awesome things that are around us, and learning how to really calm my ego and learning about my ego and removing myself from being the point person, right? Of like, why is this happening to me? When it's like, well, wait a second, what role did I play in this, right? And so I go to your practice in the holistic, and I want you to go ahead, just jump right into this about removing the ego in this process.
So, I mean, there's a lot of parts to that, but the first part to me is leadership. Is how do I want to lead as a lawyer, starting why it was so important to me to start a firm of my own. I feel like a lot of what we do and how we become better leaders is not asking that question, right? When not saying you don't ask it at all, but reminding yourself people are showing up different ways, and it's not all about me, even though I'm predominantly the trial lawyer in my office, trying most of the cases. And so don't know any negative stereotypes you've heard about people that do trial work, but they do tend to think it is all about me. Meaning, why is this happening? If somebody doesn't do something correctly in preparation for a trial, you're thinking, why are you doing this to me? Right? Because you're going to be messing this up for me and my trial performance. But the truth is, we step back from that. One thing I'm not always talking about my dad, but he had some good jewels. And one thing I remember him saying is, people don't show up. And I'm not saying everybody, but most people don't show up to work to do a bad job. Try to remember that about mistakes and about things that are happening and how you can help that person apply or understand how it impacts the thing overall. And that's, for his industry, that's a little bit, it's abstract, but it's not, because something I can always remember him saying is, people who are boots on the ground, what you would call boots on the ground people. And they were my dad's favorite people to talk to, because he's like, they really know what's going on the job site. You might talk to architect, engineer, and their view is up here. But the boots on the ground people can really tell you what's causing delay, what other issues are here. And sometimes, though, there would be certain safety requirements that they would think, these just take too long. I don't like doing this. When I first started, in construction, I never had to do this because it's a new reg. But my dad would just, always say, I hear you, but when we don't do things correctly, people die. We have to remember that. So I mean, that's not abstract. And so that would sink in. That would really, meaning it might not be you, but it could be somebody else. So we have to follow every regulation. They came out usually because someone died. That's usually why regulation in that industry changed in those, specifics. And then that's different for me, right? People are not going to die, but just trying to always get everyone in our office to tap into the fact that what we are doing impacts somebody's life, and on a very permanent basis. And they are spending money that they could be using for other things. Nobody litigates anything without spending tens of thousands of dollars, whether it's family law or whatever it is, all the way to a trial setting. And always trying to get them to remember what you're doing impacts a human being. It's not just, I came into work, I have to do X, Y, or Z, and then I go home. It is that, but it impacts somebody, and it doesn't just impact them today. It doesn't just impact them in this case. It impacts their entire trajectory a lot of times. So that's one way of being, holistic, or the biggest thing about it to me is, how do I want to lead? And what do I want? What do I want the impact to be on the profession? Meaning, if people work with me and I teach them that way, I hope if they believe it and it resonates with them, they teach anybody that comes after them the same way about what we do. And so I look at that as being the way to have a holistic legacy in what I do. And then I try to think about the client the same way, because trial lawyer, getting back to that, you want to perform well. That is your reputation. That is how you get other clients. And it impacts the reputation you have with judges, with your opposing counsel, and with the community. So sometimes you forget that I want to perform well, but also my client is a human being who's maybe going through the biggest traumatic experience of their life. So, and that's true even if you're not a family law litigator, because like we said before, nobody wants to get sued. And anything that impacts tens of thousands of anyone's dollars or more, because sometimes you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for litigation or more, they remember, right? That's not something they woke up that morning and it was not in their bucket of this is happening for me, right? It's in the bucket of this is happening to me. So trying to remember, even when they do not do everything we would like, the way we would like, that they are also a human being, and it's actually their traumatic experience we're in, not vice versa. They're not in our traumatic experience where, something they're doing is impacting our ability to perform. We're in their traumatic experience and we're trying to help them. Our job is to help them understand why something they did is going to impact our ability to perform when they've paid us so much money and they want the best possible outcome, and try to get everybody in the same boat, not create resistance where it's like us versus the client or us versus each other. It's us versus everybody else. We're collective us.
I'm sure that level of stoicism that you learned from your grandmothers and all the rest who experienced that probably plays a big role in this. I really like how you say that, in that, it's their traumatic experience that we're, helping them through. It's not the other way around. I think that that's so important. That I think that, that carries in so many other industries as well. I mean, even when you're thinking about in the sales industry, it's the same thing. It's their problem that you're trying to solve, not your problem of your sales issue. Right. It's very similar. And when you do that, it's you truly are helping the person and the individual. We're kind of playing two lines here, and that's what your firm does, in that you have the small businesses that you help, and because you have such an attachment to with everything that you've experienced and being a business owner yourself and wanting to help them in regulation and everything. And the other thing that you've brought up a few times here is also the family law side of things, and helping families through divorces, and you mentioned domestic violence and mental health and all this other stuff. That is obviously very important. I'm interested in that side of your business as well. As what does that look like? What are some of the things that these people are experiencing that maybe we can touch on in a way that if anybody's listening, they can understand what kind of guidance you'd be able to offer?
So the reason I really talk about all of those things together too is because they are a collective. People who one of the struggles, I think, in family law is, what do people really understand about trauma? People being trauma informed, even mental health. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times today talking about the troubled teen industry is really a trauma industry. And without getting too much in depth to their article, the bottom line is that the way even people who provide mental health services think about trauma has changed, and how you treat trauma and what things you experience are coming from trauma. And so I collectively talk about substance abuse, mental health, and DV because they are a collective in my mind. They do not usually happen in silos. Usually when you see what we would define typically as a domestic violence dynamic, you are dealing with mental health and the issues, and you're also usually dealing with substance abuse issues, which may have come about by somebody who is self-medicating a mental health issue. You see it, and I think it's important for me to talk about it in that context too, because something that concerns me is a thought that there is a solution to that doesn't examine all three of those things collectively when they exist, and try to figure out, is there a core mental health issue that, if treated, could alleviate the dynamics? and maybe not completely, but help a lot. In my experience, I have seen that to be the case. And I think a lot of judges would say the same thing, but that it's not always the case. But that it's important to look at that collectively and see if there is a way, kind of like I was talking about before too, when things break down, what's really causing the deterioration, and getting to which came first, the chicken or the egg, in this whole core of now what is just a incredibly toxic dynamic. Because you have a lot of situations that get to that level of toxicity, but they involve parties who are going to have to go on and co-parent children. And there's whatever is happening maybe should not be happening. I should agree with that. I don't think anybody's saying that, but it's not a dynamic that's going to involve in the termination of one party's parental rights. So how do we holistically divide the family in a way that we are acknowledging the co-parenting, or now people are saying parallel parenting, whatever, the parenting that's going to have to take place of the children of this marriage. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think I always try to talk about those three things together, because I don't think you can separate them.
Yeah.
They really all go together.
And it kind of reminds me back to what you were saying earlier about the attorneys, some attorneys who might cause this huge frustration or bring up anger and all this other stuff and upsetness to try to get to that, like you said, eliminate somebody's rights. Where it sounds like where you come in is more of like, let's untangle the issues that are already there, and let's find solutions to each one of those so that we can have a better understanding on the other side.
Right. And we can have conditions and guidance from the court about requiring people to continue counseling or requiring them to continue some type of treatment. I mean, we see that too in the criminal law sphere, space now too, where they are really thinking about certain things, especially addiction issues from a mental health standpoint, and how can we rehabilitate people instead of, just thinking about it from a punishment space. How can we look at getting funds to offer treatment they might not be able to afford, whether it's substance abuse, mental health, or what is commonly referred to as dual diagnosis, which is usually it's a mental health and there's substance abuse has developed, but it was really a self-medication issue. Mm-hmm. How can we address that issue so we foster this person back to being a part of society rather than just focusing on punishment? So to me, that applies also in family law situations. How can we focus on this family functioning at the highest possible level as a separated family moving forward? And it's certainly not to add the most amount of trauma to them during the legal process. And it's also not to only focus on dividing the family without focusing on, well, what got it to this level of toxicity to begin with? And can we make sure those issues are getting addressed even after these parties are out of the court process?
Yeah, and that the healing process. So in terms of addressing both and going back to kind of the entrepreneur side of all of this and the business owner side of all of this, it makes me think about the idea of singular focus, and we see this in law. We see it. We have an insurance company, so I'm in insurance, and we see it in insurance of having this singular focus. And in law, you might have you have the like you said, the tax lawyer and the divorce lawyer and the and you can go down the list, and they all have that name in front of them, and they're very singularly focused. And for you, it sounds like there's two distinctions between what you focus on. And so I'm interested in how you were able to start your firm, and did you start it with a singular focus and then expand, or did you start it with both in mind? How did you start in terms of that?
It was probably the main thing with the firm was kind of having this holistic focus. And you talked about in the intro, which is true, I worked with a designer to come up with design within the firm that is psychologically calming. Mm-hmm. So specifically elements of nature are used throughout but literally what I came to her with is I want people to come into our firm and have the same feeling they have when they're going into a day spa. Because when you sit in the lobby of most day spas, you just immediately decompress.
Mm-hmm.
And, anybody coming into our space, grab some
Yeah,
water.
take a moment here, and I'll also kind of help our audience hear this too. In that, I'm going to share a little bit here. So we, of course, you can find this video on YouTube at some point. To be honest, here, it's going to be there soon. But you are dressed in a very calming way, and your environment, just here where you are taking this call from, or this video chat from, is calming. You have this beautiful painting behind you with clouds and a very calming sense. And then even in the way that you dress, and I mentioned it when we first came on the air, of like this like silky shirt that's just falling on you, and these beautiful vibrant colors. And I do get this vibe and this sense from you of calm, and yeah, you're a lawyer. You could have showed up in a suit and a blazer, but you showed up in this like really relaxed, calming way, which I thought was really, really neat. And you're having a choking fit right now, which how ironic to calm. I would say take your time to get your voice back, because I know that you will be able to get it all back together here. And I'm just going to go back to what we kind of were just talking about in terms of starting your firm off with a focus on the holistic side, but also a focus on helping your clients being able to get through any situation. And so you were explaining before on how they come into your office and you want to be able to just set the tone right from the beginning of, this is going to be a challenging experience, but you're going to be able to have some calm as you go through it.
So
And, don't worry. You know what we'll do? I'll make sure to earmark this part for you, and so you can get your voice back, and we'll just cut this part out. So this isn't too challenging, actually, at 1:11, because I don't want you to choke here while you're trying to get it back. And I know that's the worst piece. That's the worst part, when you're just trying to get it back, and it's like you're going too fast. So take your time to get your throat back.
Yeah, not sure what happened there. So really the right from the moment that anybody enters the lobby, the lighting is lower. There are natural elements throughout the office, and there's lighting considerations all throughout the office. The other thing that we focused on was sound, because I personally believe a lot of background noise is stressful. But the other thing I had really noticed in other law firms and even in doctors' offices that I'd been in was when I can hear what's happening in the room next to me. That's very disconcerting, because I'm thinking these people are sharing their most private information right now, and I can hear what they're saying, which means they can possibly hear what I'm saying. So we focused a lot also on how would we reduce sound, sound traveling. We invested in, based on our designer's recommendations, and an acoustic tile that would be more similar to what would be somewhere where somebody might be doing audio recording. It's a very dense acoustic tile, so that sound doesn't travel through our space, so that when people are in the rooms with us. And then we also have something that's creating a white noise, a very gentle white noise, to further diffuse that, so that when people are meeting with us in our conference rooms, in our offices, they're there. That space is there. It's their space. I mean, it becomes theirs, because there's no background noise. There's no hearing what people are saying, through the halls. We also took a lot of consideration about where we would put our conference rooms. so they would also not be butting up to each other, and people entering the space would not have to have a lot of cross contact with somebody else, right? When somebody's coming out of a conference room, they're not seeing a lot of activity in our hallway, or they're not seeing other clients, which I think personally, can be stressful for clients because they're always concerned. Who knows what's happening to me? Who knows what's going on in my lawyer's office? And that's just additional background thought that I think people have when they're going through personal legal issues, is they want that to be private unless they choose to share that with people.
Yeah. And I mean, so that speaks about the environment. And part of, I guess, too, what I wanted to understand from a business owner standpoint is the decision to do what you do and have the family side of things and the small business side of things, if I understand.
So really, that's also very organic in my mind, because having gone through the audit and later having gone through my own personal divorce, I had people who would refer clients who also were small business owners. And they knew that I would be able to help navigate, because sometimes both spouses are owners, true owners, not just operating the business together, but members of the entity. They have, they might have a sub-S, but they might not want to stop being in business together, because they may have built a business that they were hoping would serve future generations and their children. And sometimes they may even be operating the business already with children who are adults at the time that they're getting this divorce. So it's a lot to navigate, and they would want a family law attorney who's also experienced in business transactions to help navigate that. So that's how it all kind of, organically, I feel like, came about. And Gray Gill, like I said, is just also came about organically the same way. It's my own life experience. So we were talking about, how is this bucket serving me, right? It is because people know about that experience, and because I had the experience, it gives me a different perspective and level of knowledge that a lot of people only operating in family law might have. And so that's really how all of those things kind of came together.
It sounds, through your experiences. And as you said before too, that was part of your intro too, in that, talking about these different experiences and what led you to where you are today. What I pick up from what you just shared there, and I'm happy you were able to put it together for us, is one complements the other. And so for our entrepreneurs out there, our business leaders out there who are, either singularly focused and saying, I've been going this one path and I've chose this one industry to target or whatever it is, that's great, right? To have that one focus. And then when they're getting to a point where they want to expand a little bit, they're meeting people in different industries, they're meeting, there's different needs that are coming about. From what I get from what you just shared there, and why it's successful for you to be able to have these two different areas of focus, is they complement each other. If you're going to be singular focused, which is wonderful, to have this one thought, one idea, go after this one industry, whatever it is, however you're looking at it from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, from whatever it is, serving your community's perspective, that's great. And if, as you're looking to expand, what complements it? What are people, and as you said, people were coming to you, what are people coming and asking you to offer more of? And what's rising to the top there? Because you can't do it all. They're going to ask for, I'm sure you've been asked for a bunch of other things and you had to say no to. Yeah. But what are the things that are rising to the top? So I like that you broke that down for us, because that was a question for me, just for myself when starting my business. My insurance business was a little bit easier, because it's like, okay, I'm going to focus on home, auto, and small business. And it's fairly simple. And we talk about Main Street businesses on the insurance side. As you get bigger, as you become a bigger agency, you're probably focusing more in one industry and all that. But we're not there, so it's easier. But on my speaking business, this has been a big thing. I'm growing out my speaking business to be able to do keynotes and workshops and all the rest. And the question I'm constantly asked by people in HR positions and in referral type of roles is, well, what's your focus? Who's your audience? Who do you want to speak to? And I'm going, everybody.
Everybody.
Right. And if you're speaking to everybody, you're speaking to nobody. So that's not true. Obviously, I think I have a niche here for the entrepreneur, but I think it's very important to touch on that. Something you said, oh, go ahead, please.
Well, I think too, something you've touched on a couple of times in different ways, honing your focus or understanding your why. We've talked about that several times.
Yeah. I
feel like the longer I go on, it's like it's like a bonsai tree. It's like a constant pruning process, not that you don't want to expand, but because you're a creative person, not to stretch yourself too thin. So I really do try to think about what you're talking about a lot. And for instance, really do try to immerse myself with other business owners, and have made a very conscious effort to do that, because it is very hard to feel, or very easy to feel isolated, and can be difficult to feel understood if you do not have a network of business owners that you're able to bounce ideas off of and talk to, because they are going through the same things you're going through, and other people, as empathetic as they may be, are not, they're not going to be good guides, and they don't have similar experiences or different experiences. You may need information or advice. So I spend a lot of time now in groups devoted to entrepreneurial small business ownership. So I think that's another way that became very organic, is that became a referral source, because those are the people I started gravitating towards generally more than previously.
Yeah, and enjoying being around, right? Because you were previous to this a business owner, and I feel the same way. It's kind of like when I think about my journey on my speaker business, it's kind of the same thing. I did insurance for so long, I was always in these small business circuits of the chambers and the associations, and it goes back to decision making, like you said earlier. It's like I didn't just end up in the chamber and on these committees and on these boards. I chose to commit myself to all of it. And the reason why I chose it is I like it, and I like the people. There's other associations that are different, that are very different, that aren't business focused, and that are completely different, that I could have sold insurance to. Right. I didn't gravitate to them. Right. So there's something to be said about that. I love that you bring that up. Something that you said that I really want to go into a little bit with you is, and I love this because I never applied it in the business sense. So again, just in terms of speaking, public speaking, that is, something that most people deal with is fear, right? And they're like, I'm afraid to go up on stage and speak. And I'm like, you're not going to die, right? And I try to help them understand that, like, fear is not the same as dying on stage. Like, look, if you have a heart problem and all that other stuff, I get it. But for the most part, public speaking, you're not going to die. It's just nerves, right? And you said something that I thought was so cool, of your fear is speaking louder than reality. And I was like, oh my goodness, that applies to so many situations where we allow our fear to speak louder than reality. I'm not going to lie. I'm probably going to steal that line from you because it's so awesome. I'll attribute it to you for sure. And they're going to be like, who's Lisa Gill? I'm going to be like, you have to meet her. But you talk about a book, and I brought it up previously, and I saw your eyes light up when I mentioned it. So I wanted to bring it up here. You talk about a book, Reboot. And in that, it goes through the FEAR acronym. And I would love if you could share a little bit more about this, because this is definitely something that people in our industries of business and community leadership deal with, is fear of the unknown, fear of what will people think, of judgment, fear of just stepping outside of your comfort level. And I think it's so wonderful that you have this book as part of your repertoire.
Yeah, fear of anybody seeing you really, truly, authentically, right? That book is an incredible book, Reboot by Jerry Colonna. And he was a startup founder, and then he started doing coaching, like executive coaching. And he talks about the acronym of FEAR, which is feelings experienced as reality, right? You think it is your reality. It kind of goes back to when you're talking about imposter syndrome, or thinking you don't belong in a place. And then really acknowledging what I've done. And I think it's important for entrepreneurs, not just the fear part, but what we were talking about. And I don't like imposter syndrome, but I know exactly it's all fear based. And I mean, I don't like the phrase. It is feeling like you don't belong, which everybody can relate to, right? Feeling like you don't belong in the sense of, have I accomplished enough? Have I done enough? Do I deserve to be here? And part of that also, though, it segues into something that we're always doing, I think, as entrepreneurs or hard charging high achievers. And I know that's being called into question in modern day time, which means you're never taking the time to recognize what you've just accomplished before you're looking for the next thing to accomplish or or achieve. And so I love that book because I feel like what he talks about in that book is, like you talked about your ego, that's part of that, like acknowledging your ego. When you're doing that, is it ego based or is it values based? And meaning, do I want to achieve that next thing because it aligns really with and getting recentered with values regularly, because the more you do stuff, the more people ask you to do stuff, right? The more they ask you to sit on boards, the more they ask you to speak, the more they ask you to do. And really, really, that's why I was talking about the pruning. It becomes a process, not if does the opportunity exist, but does the opportunity really align with what I said I wasn't going to spend my energy on this year? And if it doesn't, trusting that the right opportunity will come. And I know you can't always do it exactly like that, because sometimes you're like, well, maybe this opportunity leads to the next opportunity. You just have to keep evaluating that. But you have to remember the one thing that is finite is your energy, right? We only have so much. We have to get rest. We know what we have to do to perform at a high level. And does this really align with what I have said my values are, or the things that I want more of? And if it's opportunities, if it involves an opportunity to speak to entrepreneurs, it is that. And if it doesn't, can I see any way that it segues into that? And if it doesn't, I really appreciate the offer. I have to politely decline. That is something I never did, and I don't regret it, because a lot of those experiences as an early professional, and so people in entry level, I hear everything that I hear, in present day time, but you do have to kind of do more to get the experience of what you don't like. And so I don't know that I would tell somebody that who's just starting out this in the same way, but somebody who has been in the space and they know what they're looking for their next thing, and they've really done the work to identify their values and goals. I think it becomes a pruning process throughout. And that's what he's talking about in that book, is getting out of the mindset of trying to always hit the next precipice, right? Okay, I've hit that peak. I want to hit the next peak. I want to hit the next peak. And he's not talking about now suddenly reverting to being low performing or, nothing, or laying down on the ground, but he's talking about hearing yourself and your motivations of why you want the next thing. And if you get in the habit of really doing that, it will help you pick the real next best thing instead of depleting your energy. Because what he did, he founded a startup, and then he started working with startup founders who hit burnout. And so that's why he's trying to help them refocus, not just to hit whatever the next is, but think really hard about the why of the next, so they can keep, because you cannot keep startup energy. That's the bottom line. You cannot go at the pace you started at. You will hit a place where energy is depleted, and both mental and physical. And when you do that, how do you get the reset? That's why it's called reboot. And so now I try to think of it, instead of just thinking about it, which we know it's not that anyway. We've all seen that success is not this, it's this, and then there's the squiggly line, and then it's back up.
Yes.
And so I also try to think of it as like, it's this, and then it's okay to take a space right here,
Mm-hmm.
just to acknowledge what I already did to get to this,
Mm-hmm.
and not discount or not honor it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are things I achieved. This is not a bad place to be. I know I want more, but that doesn't mean I don't honor what I already did and what I already achieved. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think too about, what does more mean? What does it really mean based on what I'm saying my true desires are, my true values at this stage? And I know I want to impact small business owners. And so I really, because that's my journey. That's what I feel. I want them to understand. And I have seen some very impactful speakers who really talked about their failures, and they really talked about their setbacks. And, it's not easy to do that. So I really want people to see that whatever they are experiencing is not permanent. And then the other piece of it is, there is a way to impact the space rather than just feel like it's happening to you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The happening for me.
Yeah, I think, and again, it goes back to the why, which is so important, because like you said, you can't get to this place of making this decision if you don't know what your purpose is.
Right.
And if you don't know what your values are. And I like how you were able to describe that of, because we do, like, as achievers, as everybody listening, because there's nobody tuning into this podcast going, oh, I just turned it on because it was on. No. You chose to listen to this
Searching
podcast.
for that.
Right. Yeah. You definitely chose to listen to this, because it's not like I'm some celebrity. You don't know who I am. You only follow me because you want to learn more from people like Lisa here. So you're attaching it to those values too, right? Like, what are your values and what is your value system? And avoiding burnout really comes from attaching all of that. And then I love how you just said this about giving yourself rest. I always think about the Greek mythology of the man rolling the ball up the hill. And that's sometimes how it feels, right? Is like you're in it, you're grinding, you're working hard. And like you think you're at the top of the hill, and it's just like, nope, there's still more to climb. And in reality, like you said, we signed up for this. There will always be more to climb, but sometimes we got to put a wedge in that big ball that we're rolling up the hill, and we got to stand to the side. We got to look down and go, wow, look at how high I've climbed. Look at my accomplishments, not in an ego way, but in a way of saying, I've done this and this is wonderful, and celebrating that and taking the time to enjoy it with the people we love, of a family dinner, of a toast, of something like that. This reminds me of a story, very, very briefly here. And I was doing a training, and I had a woman in my training, wonderful. She was really you could tell she had leadership qualities in the training and everything. And then we had our one-to-one coachings. And so I was talking with her, and I asked her, I said, so what's going on? And she said, well, I have this really tough time leading my team. And I was like, wait a second. I was like, I see it, like in the trainings that we do in the workshops, that you're a leader. Like, what's going on? So we started talking more, and she said, I got this role, and I'm doing this, and that. And she's telling me about all the different parts of the role and why she doesn't feel like she fits and all this other stuff. And I said to her, wait a second, so you're just telling me about like this progression of you went from one leadership role to another leadership role to another leadership role. And this one is like a really big one that you kind of like never dreamed of having, and now you have it. I stopped her for a second. I said, did you ever celebrate along the way any of these accomplishments? Or was it just a title change and you got it on your business card? She goes, it was essentially a title change on my business card. And, I came in the next day with some more responsibilities. So I said to her, I gave her the recommendation. I said, do me a favor, just hear me out here. I said, could you just spend some time with your husband, go out to dinner with him? I kind of knew her on a personal level, of course, to be able to say this. I said, go out to dinner with him, and I want you to order a bottle of champagne or something and toast yourself for this accomplishment. Just please do that for me. And, if I'm wrong, then tell me I'm wrong. And she did it. And she did come back and tell me she felt so different by being able to look back at her accomplishments with her husband and see the path ahead for everything that she's planning on doing. And I'll tell you this, she's actually now sponsors one of the other groups that I'm training right now, and actually leveled up another one. And she told me, she gave me a big hug when I saw her. It's like, that was a big change in my life. And it was because she never did that. She never celebrated any of these victories. And it was almost holding her back.
Yeah, because all of being an entrepreneur, even if you're not entrepreneurial, all of accomplishment will feel like a burden and will feel like it is a burden you're bearing until you reach some imaginary pinnacle,
Right.
unless you do exactly what we're talking about. You pour back into the vessel,
Mm.
you appreciate what you have, and really get, somewhat minimalistic on that.
Hmm.
I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad I have my family and our health, or whatever you have,
Hmm.
and take that time, because otherwise you're miserable and you're making everybody else miserable.
Yeah, yeah, and
A
it's
good leader or a good partner for anything that way.
yeah, because they're constantly grinding. So I love that you bring that up, and then I love that there's gonna be another peak, but
Right.
as long as it's value driven and attached to your why, it's gonna make it that much easier to get to that peak and know what's right for you and all that. And I also like the fact that you point out that the experience plays a role in this, and that if you're a new entrepreneur, a new business leader, yeah, you know what? You're going to have to take some bad, you're going to have to
Yeah.
take some bad, I don't know, advice or some bad leads
You're gonna have
into
to
it.
be in more groups and groups that you might
Yeah.
not like, but that's how you learn what groups you do want to be with, like you said. But you're gonna have to do more handshaking, more meeting, more
Yes.
all of that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just part of it.
And
Yeah,
that's part of it. Yeah, exactly. So realize that wherever you're sitting right now is that, there's if you're in a bad meeting in a bad room, whatever it is, it's happening for you, right? Because
yeah, it's happening for you.
you could know that, you know what, this might not be the industry or room I want to be in,
Right.
and vice versa. When it feels really good, then make a note of that. And then of course our experienced ones, you touched on that. You do a lot of work as well, with other organizations to help other organizations in your community. And one that I know that you're very proud of, being, I believe, a board member of, is the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. And I'm interested if you could share a little bit more about that and the work that you do there.
So the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers is an organization that you you are inducted to. I'm a
Mm.
fellow, and so they the main reason I'm very proud of that is one of my mentors suggested this organization to me, and it was during a time where I was feeling what we were talking about, some of that uh, restriction, contraction in life, a little bit of burnout, and it really breathed new life into me. These lawyers are operating at a very high level, and it is a great organization. Like when you get into something like EO, if you're familiar with that, or any type of organization where people are in this organization doing what you want to do, and you don't feel weird anymore. You feel like, okay, there's I'm there's not a lot of people doing these things, but I know they're being done, and how would they get done in my industry? And that's what I feel like that organization gave me. Is it gave me a group that is offering, the most cutting to me the most modern solutions in family law and continuing legal education. And then it also gave me a network of mentors across the country that they may be doing something different in their jurisdiction than we're doing here. And so they're at the forefront, or they've been doing it for years. And so that was really, it breathed new life into me to be inducted as a fellow in that organization. And the other thing is you have to put all of your professional experience, into an application for them. And it's pretty intensive, where you go through all the cases you've ever handled, the trials, and all the, you provide written work product. And so it also was a little bit of a reaffirmation to feel like, okay, like we were talking about, okay, I've done some things, right? These people think I've done some things, and they seem like they really know what they're doing. But really, because they are looking at, to me, what is the most modern and holistic way of practice, and how can we improve the practice as a whole? How can we elevate the practice? And so that that it's an incredible organization for
Mm.
anybody who is practicing in family law. I definitely recommend looking into it. And then the piece of that is I sit on a committee where it is devoted to looking at future of law practice and practice management and implementing technology. And the reason I'm so passionate about that is because a lot of attorneys, especially family law, because they tend to be smaller sized firms, they're not mega firms, they implement technology slow. And what I have experienced is that puts a lot of wear and tear on the people providing legal services. And it also puts a lot of wear and tear on the client. Clients are flabbergasted by your methods when they're work. My husband works for a mega conglomerate and does international compliance work as an attorney. And so he's thinks, it's bizarre the way a lot of small law firms would be providing services, because no lawyer he deals with is providing services that way. And he's not working that way internally within his organization. So when you have clients and they're thinking, you need me to bring you paper documents so you can photocopy them. They're thinking you don't have a system by which you can receive digital information that's secure like everyone else on the planet. So being a part of that committee is also very important to me. I've loved being a part of that. I love that that this organization as a whole is focusing on how can family law attorneys provide services in a way that has less wear and tear on the client, and also I think has less wear and tear on the individuals providing the legal services. Just the most streamlined way to take in information, to review information, and to give legal advice. I think it's quicker, and I think it's quicker, more convenient, and long-term also less expensive for every person involved in that process. So just like any industry would have to examine those things, law has to examine it too.
Yeah, and you're serving so many others, like you said. When you're a trial lawyer and you're working on a case, you're impacting this family, you're impacting this person's life, and as you said that earlier. And so, being on this committee, being on this board, you're helping other trial lawyers, other lawyers like yourself, who are out there, who are fighting for these people, learn better and newer ways of doing this. So I love how you're giving back in that sense. I know that you also speak a little bit about AI and how that could also help improve some of this. And I like how you brought it to the employee levels. And I'm interested in terms of that, in terms of leadership and employees, of embracing new technology and how your team embraces it.
We really are looking at that a lot, looking at how can we do some things more automated and how can we use AI. I do think you can use it in certain ways, and more what we're doing now is examining what are the best ways for us to use it that we think are responsible. Mm-hmm. And so you would never be able to put, for instance, in something like a chat GPT, sensitive client information. A chat GPT makes it very clear that things that are put into the platform become the platforms. They own that. Mm-hmm. So there's certain things that you can do. And I think templates, creating certain templates that wouldn't have client identifiers and don't have firm identifiers for letters and memos. That's something we've looked at, and we're working with a consultant who's helping us do that. And so that helps get rid of a lot of things that are predominantly administrative, and to me, sometimes don't add great value or traction to somebody's legal goals and objectives, but they still have to be done. They still have to, these communications still have to get out, and you create the templates so that then putting the critical information is very less time consuming. Mm-hmm. The critical information input is less time consuming. That's less billing for the client. And it's also less time that their legal team is working on that type of a task that's more administrative versus an actual task that pivots their case forward mm-hmm. to a resolution. And so we try to get as deep as we can early into the details and the facts so that we understand how we can meet their long-term objectives faster. And that's really what we're focusing on, using automation and leveraging that and AI is in this period mm-hmm. anyway.
And I'm with, really go ahead.
Automating everything that has to do with, billing and invoicing. So that is not a labor intensive job, while also making sure there is a internal person, and they're not being outsourced to somebody else to handle that. There's an internal person that they can speak to should they have a question about that.
And I agree with your dad's statement of like, nobody shows up to work to do a bad job. And I'll expand on that I don't think anybody shows up to work to do menial work either.
Right.
And so when we look at technology, this has always been my argument, is I feel like when we look at technology, it's not taking away it might, right, in some circumstances, but it's taking away the little mundane, repeated things, tasks that, quite honestly, your administrator doesn't really enjoy doing and you don't get the best out of. So why not remove that to where they can come to work and you can get the best out of them, is how I see it as well.
Right. And they also want purpose-driven work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so the menial tasks do not give
it removes that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that you remove that. Something I always like to learn about my guest is a mantra or something that they live by. If you have one off the top of your head, that's wonderful. I did read something about you that I thought was pretty interesting to bring up for you.
Okay. I can tell you the mantra.
Tell us.
Do you know who Arenda Ryder is? He is an artist. Anyway, somebody bought me something when I was trying to decide about going out on my own, a painting, and it says, "Your comfort zone will kill you." And I've really made that the mantra for the last several. My mom passed away in January of 2020, and my only child went to college in August of 2019. So there was a lot of pivotal things that happened right before I decided to go on my own, and that has really been my mantra.
Yeah, and expanding on that, so I wasn't far off from what I got from you in that you said you can't decide to jump into the ocean and still keep one foot on the shore.
Yeah.
And
There's no safe way. There's no safe way. You just have to decide you're doing it, and then you get in.
That's right. I'd argue that's like your comfort zone will kill you. And you also talk about being comfortable with discomfort. And I know we've talked a lot about decision making and dealing with fear and dealing with all these other things, but I think as we conclude here, I think it's such a good statement to maybe leave with everybody with what you're saying and expanding on in that your comfort zone will kill you, and how we can apply that to our entrepreneurial journey or business journey, and even some of the other people that you're helping in terms of their domestic journeys, of whether it's a divorce or whatever they're dealing with, on how stepping outside of that comfort.
Yeah. So that's a lot of questions. I mean, there was a lot with that, but that's a big part too of what we try to tell people going through the legal journey. Because that's my own real experience, is there is light at the end of this tunnel, and you do have more control over what's going to happen ultimately than you think. And here are the things based on our experience and knowledge that you can do, because a lot of people, they like having those tasks. It makes them feel like they're not just spinning. And here's the things in our experience that you can do and that will help you in this process. And, whether it's certain information we need you to gather, because it will come directly from your sources. It's not stuff that would come from us internally. We won't create it. It's your information. Or, really, really talking to people that we see things that are showing up, and kind of explaining to the people within the firm too, this is a stress response, and we can talk to them about it, but we're going to try to be compassionate, and it is going to get in the way of them helping us achieve some certain goal here. But let's just talk to them and say, let's call a spade and say, here's what you're doing. So the biggest one that happens in divorce cases a lot of times is they get non-responsive. We call it ostriching, right? They're sticking their head in the sand. They're hoping if they just ignore you, something will go away and they won't have to be in the process they're in. And just talking to them to explain, lots of people, this happens with lots of clients. That's why we know that normalizes what's happening, instead of making them feel all those shame and discomfort feelings like, I don't know, I can't just get it together, right? I can't just figure out how this is going to work. I know how to do so many other things. And especially if somebody's identity is they are a driver, they are a person who makes things happen, that feeling of powerlessness is even more painful or shameful to them. They're not somebody that things happen to. They make things happen.
Mm-hmm.
So just explaining to them, I'm talking to you about it because I notice you're doing it. And also, I know what it is because I see other people doing it. So you're
Mm-hmm.
not alone in this space, but you are doing something that's harmful. And if it's not something you think you can fix, we need you to get to somebody, because the other thing that I always saw is people conflating the divorce law practice with mental health practice, meaning clients becoming very dependent on their divorce attorney, calling all the time, but really calling because there's things that they need that are not really legal advice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we charge a lot of money. I don't intend to charge anybody for something that's a service I'm not, I don't have the ability to provide, and I don't want them to get confused about my role. And if they need to develop a relationship with some kind of counselor or even a coach, 'cause some people, they don't counseling. They're like, yeah, I don't like the word or whatever. If they need like a life coach, um, developing some kind of relationship with somebody like that early so that they have that moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to trial stages, they're good.
Yeah.
They can identify those things when they're happening, and they know what to do about it.
Yeah, and I like what you with the ostrich that you brought up there, because it's true. I mean, like, look, if the fetal position could be really comfortable for a really long time, but if you stay in that corner, eventually you're not going to drink or eat or anything.
That's
So
right.
to your point, it will kill
Yeah.
you.
I tell people you can lay down, but you cannot stay there.
Yeah.
So you can take a minute here and there. I understand
Yep.
sometimes you might need a pause, but you can't stay there. And sometimes in litigation situations, you can't stay there very long at all.
Yeah.
So develop meditation practice or something.
I'd imagine that you are not in your comfort zone for a lot of the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely. I like that you said that about meditation. It's something that I believe has saved my life. I think it's, reducing the self-talk and being able to get more control of your feelings because of self-awareness. Definitely meditation. All right, we're going to switch gears here as we conclude here and kind of bring it back to the top, because I did not forget about your golf reference. So back to golf real quick. So how long have you been golfing for, and how did you get into it?
I first started golfing when my son was young because one of our neighbors invited me, and I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, sure, I'll try it. And she was real athletic girl, and kind of, also somebody who was up for whatever. Like I don't think she ever saw a challenge she didn't think she could take on. And so I admired her, and I thought, oh yeah, okay. She asked me to go. I'll try it. I'll try it. I mean, I explained I didn't know how. She was like, there's not really a lot to know. It's a lesson anyway. We're just going to do a group lesson, and then we'll do some kind of clinic. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did that. And then when I started law school, I didn't really have any time to do anything. And I had gone through a divorce, was in law school, was living with my parents, like a lot of people who are rebuilding after a divorce. It's super fun. I thought it was going to be the worst experience of my life, but it honestly, it rebuilt a lot of bridges that were somewhat burned when in my youth. So it actually, again, what is this doing for me? It did something.
Oh, that's good.
But so in law school, I didn't really play. Then another female professional, she's a forensic CPA. She does forensics accounting. So sometimes she gets involved in family law cases where forensic accounting might be needed, or business valuation. She invited me, and I went to play with her. Same kind of situation, though. I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a dumpster fire, but I'll do it anyway. And I remember being there and telling her, I'm really sorry. And she was like, I don't know why you're apologizing. And she was like, here's what we're going to do. I want to take you out one day, because you will be surprised that you will see golfers of all varieties, male and female, not golfing any better than you, but they at least come out here. And so that was another one of those life lessons, right? She was like, it's beautiful out here. You don't have to, you start where you are and you just keep going. And then that's it. And quit making all the apologies and all that stuff, just show up. That's it. And so that mentality, I was like, okay, all right. I like it. Yeah. And I've just been playing ever since.
Yeah.
But then fever. You take lessons and you get real serious and you think you're good. And then you play really well one time. And then you go back and you play just like you did the first time. And you're like, what is this game? What is this game?
It's such a lesson in life, right? And that's kind of
Yes.
like why I wanted to bring it back there was it is such a lesson in life. And I love sports and any other hobby that you might have out there of whatever it is in the arts or wherever it is, but we'll use sports since that's what we're talking about right now. Because like you said, you have colleagues and you have peers, clients, and all sorts of different people that you could bring with you when you're doing golf, or like I play basketball. I do it with basketball too, or go for a walk. I love these different, like, get people out of their office to have conversations, and it really brings things back to the human qualities of life, right? Of where we're talking about something that's really serious. And if we were in the office, we might have gone to, I don't know, hard data or something like that. But because we're out in the environment, we're walking, we're talking, we're playing basketball, we're playing golf, we're doing a hobby, we're at the arts, whatever it is, we're at a museum. We're starting to really get back to, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk this through. Let me hear you out. You can hear me out. And it becomes a really nice conversation that's been my experience with bringing sports into our work, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It's a different way to learn about each other and engage than
yeah.
typical. And I love any way you can get some kind of physical activity into that too.
I'm all about that. I have the beautiful walkway bridge right by where I live, and whenever I have the opportunity to bring a business partner out there, when we meet up, and so on my calendar invite, it's like there's the diner, and that's what it is, right? And it's like just a flag post of like here's where I am, here's where we could meet, and we can meet there. And I always let them know ahead of time, like, hey, if it's a nice day, right down the road from that diner is the walkway bridge.
Yeah.
Do you want to go for a walk? And they always say yes. They always say yes.
Yes.
And it's so cool. You do a lot, again, in your practice and with your consulting group. And I know that you also put on workshops and really help people understand what you do so that they make the right decision for themselves. What are some of the ways that people can find you? Where can they find you and reach out to you to be able to learn more about what you do?
Really, the best way is probably just looking me up on LinkedIn, Lisa Gill, and then Lisa Gill 2023 on Instagram. I'm always posting information regarding workshops or other resources too that I think help business owners with the stuff that we've been talking about, and also families.
Just real quick, because we didn't get to talk about them much, but I just want people to know about this resource, the workshops that you do. If you could just share a little bit about that real quick.
Sure. The workshops are exactly when you said at the beginning, this was like a workshop. It's exactly a lot of that. So I also do workshops for women going through divorce, talking about financial information. Really, it's helping them understand what is the impact of divorce. It's really designed for somebody who's not going through a divorce, but has considered it. And to help them understand, this is what the actual financial impact is of that. This is what the emotional impact is. I have a counselor who comes in and discusses that. And then they might also discuss, here's an appropriate way to think about having that conversation if you are intending to move forward. And then I have a financial expert come in and talk about different things. They might talk about business valuation or business interest, and then they might also talk about, wealth management and rebuilding, because a lot of times those were really started for women who had left the workforce. And the biggest thing that I see too is that people don't really realize what the financial impact, and I know people think I'm crazy for saying this, they've told me, but I really think people who are considering divorce would benefit from really understanding what divorce is before they go down that road. They shouldn't be figuring out what the financial impact of divorce is after they've decided they've had it and they just want to move through. Because when I very first talked about these workshops to one of my friends, she was like, you can't do that. Nobody would ever get divorced if they knew that. And I said, well, I think that's the benefit, is that, it really helps you understand, make an informed decision. And so that's what that workshop is designed to do. But the workshops for business owners are very similar to what we were talking about in the beginning, is helping people plug into resources and know where they would even find the resources, and how can they understand what legislation is pending, and how can they get involved in local politics. And sometimes it may even just be like, I've got this ordinance and they keep sending me citations and I don't really understand, it's just maybe stuff like that. And we take Q&A. So that workshop is designed really to plug business owners in. And then the other workshop is designed to kind of give somebody an idea before they're engaging in the legal process about what does that really involve? And also, how can they start understanding? Because a lot of what we see is people who've been out of the workforce and they're extremely fearful. They don't understand how to develop what I would call your team, a wealth manager, a CPA, banker, whatever.
And people can find these workshops on your website. And that would be Gill Family Law.
www.gillfamlaw.com.
Famlaw.com. Okay.
Yeah, FAM.
Okay, so that's where they can find the workshops. I just want to say that you're not crazy, because unless this fact is wrong, but from what I read, or what's out there at least, is that most divorces are predicated on financial, right? Of not enough money or some sort of financial issue, and so you're not in the long. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so also the thing is, it's like a communication thing, meaning get to a level of something I'm very big on is getting to a level of transparency. We have turned money into more taboo than sex in our country. So we're in a place where couples don't really talk about their finances, and they're even getting married and they're only learning after that fact what the other person's finances are really like, and quit thinking that's taboo. Because really what I try to preach is that it's just like you wouldn't go into business with somebody not understanding certain things about them, and you are partners, right? It's probably the longest running relationship that any person is going to have. And it is like a business. It operates like a business. We are sharing resources and we are sharing goals. And if we don't really know, what those resources and goals are in advance, it's really hard to think we're going to jointly achieve them.
Yep.
So I really try to focus on that generally, for people. That's not like a gender specific thing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So they can find them on the website. And then I just want to go back to your Instagram handle. That was Lisa Gill 2023, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Everybody pay attention to that. She'll be on my live, I'm sure. This has been awesome, meeting you and learning more about you and everything that you do. I've really enjoyed our conversation today.
I did too. Thank you.
It was really cool. Awesome. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.